Hi paper crafters, I'm Trisha Morris coming to you from the Club Scrap Warehouse based in Neenah, Wisconsin. Welcome to the Stampin' Scrapbook Expo at Home mini event focusing on Slimline cards. I haven't really been focusing on slim anything except cards these days. I don't know about you, but the card that I'm going to be teaching you how to make today is so neat because it doesn't require any additional supplies other than 12 by 12 paper. I'm hoping you have some 12 by 12 paper on hand. But what you're going to learn today is sort of my approach to all of my paper crafting and card making. Let's do it as efficiently as possible. Now, the inspiration for today's cards, I should say, comes from a book structure that I learned how to make many years ago, probably about 20 years ago, called a flag book. So I've taken that concept and transferred it over into a formula that transforms 12 sheets of paper into 2 slimline cards. And when you open the card, all of these fun little flags pop up. Well, how about we get started? So here are 2 completed examples of the cards that I've made. The first pair was created with Club Scrap's Vintage Americana collection. But again, as I mentioned before, you can do this card with anything that you have in your stash. And then all of the surfaces of these flags give you tons of opportunities to do some stamping and other kinds of decorating and embellishments. And again, if you follow the formula that I'm about to share with you, you'll make 2 at a time because I figure if you're making one, you might as well make another. So after testing the formula, I made some tweaks and then I made another pair of cards with Club Scrap's Prism collection. This was released in July of this year. So I had a lot of fun with this prism style, shining bright, being colorful. You rock. These are fun. These were made with cut-aparts that were adapted from things that would have been used for pages and cards. So really had a good time making this pair. And then as a result of making these, I made some more adaptations to the formula. So here is the formula that you'll be able to download. I'll give you a link that you'll be able to access this to print it for yourself so that you can use the formula again and again. And after I make the set of cards, those will be pictured on this so you can remember what this formula makes. And I'm calling them Slimline flag cards. And at the beginning of the formula, it tells us what we need to gather. Now, if you are just following along here and watching this for the very first time, I want to encourage you to just sit back, relax, and see how it all goes down. Once you've viewed this video, you'll be able to go back and watch it again and again so that you can have a better understanding of how these cards come together, and you'll be able to follow along much more easily because you'll know exactly where we're going. All right, so I've got a series of trimming diagrams here. So the first thing you'll need to gather is paper to trim, and notice again, it's all 12 by 12, and then you also need 2 number 9 envelopes. So I need 5 sheets total, A, B, C, and D. I'm recommending that you find a print from your stash, and then paper E should be a light color. So I took Club Scrap's Beautiful Noise Kit, and I chose A and B, and those should be different colors, not the same. And then I have a print for paper C, a different print for paper D, and a light colored sheet for paper E. So again, assuming that you have paper at home, you can grab your paper from your stash and just think in terms of 2 different planes, 2 prints, and then a light color for stamping and decorating. Once we have our paper, the next step will be to trim it in a very, very specific way. For my trimming, I'm using a Fisker's guillotine style trimmer. What's really important about your trimmer is that you're able to use it to measure, because measuring will make this all work. So this particular trimmer base has these vertical columns every 1/4 inch. So be sure you're able to measure a full 12 inches no matter what kind of trimmer you happen to have. Now, if you're a card maker, there's something really important you need to know about paper. If you don't already know it, paper has a grain. And since we're starting with a 12 by 12 sheet of paper, I can control the way the grain is on this paper by checking it first. If you've ever folded a piece of paper against the grain, that'd be this direction, it sometimes can create a very crumpled, unattractive fold. If you fold the paper with the grain, it's very, very nice looking in a straight fold. The same is true even when you tear a piece of paper in half. If you're tearing with the grain, it naturally forms a somewhat straight line. If you tear against the grain, it's a very jagged tear. Sometimes you want that. So how do you determine the grain direction of your paper? Well, you hold it by the middle of one edge and you study the behavior of the paper. Now in this case, my paper is extremely stiff and inflexible. Then turn it one turn, so this is a neighboring edge, hold that, And see how the paper just wants to fold downward. It wants to bend. In my instructions, do you see in the sketch of this formula here, there's a little arrow on the sketch, and the arrow points top to bottom. So that means I want the grain, the paper, to dip easily in that direction, because it will help me later when I go to score and fold this paper into my Slimline card. All right, so let's go ahead and take this paper A, and since we're trimming paper B in the same way, I'm going to take that one as well and check the grain direction and make sure it's dipping easily top to bottom. I'm going to go ahead and cut both of these papers at the same time. Now, if you're not comfortable in doing that, by all means go back and trim the second sheet at a different time. You don't have to do them both at the same time, but it's a really efficient way to do this, and I'm all about efficiency. So let's find 11.5 for our first cut. And on the trimmer like this, you find the whole number 11, and you go to the left 2 vertical columns. That makes, so this is 11, 11.25, 11.5. And here I am. Now what you need to do next is stabilize on the clear bar to prevent the 2 sheets of paper from buckling when you bring the blade down. And then I'm going to slide the paper down to 8.5. And by that I mean both papers to 8.5. And then let's rotate the paper in the trimmer, papers, plural, in the trimmer, and we're going to trim at 10. Now these 2 pieces are going to grow up to become the bases of our card. They need to be scored, so I'm going to set those aside to be scored. And I'm sorry to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that these pieces are not used necessarily in these cards. So I'll set those aside in a different pile. Next, I have this 3 by 12 inch strip remaining, so I'm going to make a couple of cuts on this, and I have both pieces A and B, and I'll cut at 10.5 and 8. Now, these are going to become slimline panels. So these will nest on the inside of your cards. Then you have some smaller panels for your flags. And then you have these tiny rectangles. Those go in the scrap pile with the others. You also have these narrow pieces. You can set those aside as scraps as well. So we've done all the trimming required for this first papers A and B. Now I'll turn to the sketch for C and D. These are the prints. And the grain direction does not matter for the prints because they're not going to be folded. So whenever you're folding paper is when grain direction matters. But again, even these prints, they do have a grain. It's running this way. But again, it doesn't really matter how you put this one into the trimmer. All right, so let's cut at 9 3/4, and I'm doing both at the same time. So there are 2 prints, both being cut at the same time. 9 3/4. 6.5 and 3 1/4. Now I'm going to rotate the 3 1/4 by 12 that's in the trimmer base right now, both sheets. I'll make 2 cuts. The first one is at 11, and then 8 1/4. So 8 plus 1 column to the left, that's 8 1/4. I just made 2 really beautiful panels that will end up being on the front of our card. So these are the Slimline front panels. I'll put those with my other panels. And then I have 2 others. And look, these will be nesting on these maybe. We'll see how these turn out. So I'm going to make another little pile for that. And 2 little scraps have been formed here. Now I have another pair of strips. These are 3 1/4 by 12 also. And we're going to trim these into a bunch of panels. So these are going to become the flags. So we'll cut at 11, 8 1/4, 5.5, and 2 3/4. We just made a whole bunch of panels. I think these might be the same size as these. Okay, we're going to make a whole stack. All right, we're going to do that again. So let's take the next 3 1/4 by 12, same thing, 11, 8 1/4, 5.5, 2 3/4. If I stack up all those pieces, they're all the same size. Isn't that awesome? And I'm going to put them again with my pile of all the flags. This is going to be enough flags for 2 books. Okay, there are some 1-inch scraps we're going to set aside. I ended up using those 1-inch scraps on the front of this card to stamp on. I just took the back of the scrap and trimmed it and placed it right into that spot. So we can use these scraps. Now we have one more little strip. Let's trim this narrow one. This is 2 1/4 by 12. We'll trim this at 11 3/4, 9 1/2, 7 1/4, 5, and 2 3/4. All right, now I want you to check this out. Do you see these 2 pieces we made earlier? The 2 pieces we just made nest onto those perfectly, and that's what ends up on the front of your card. So I'm always showing you something in a different theme or different style just to show you, where we're headed. But isn't it cool how these nest so beautifully? The print right on top of the plane that'll end up on the front of your book. Then you also made a whole bunch of little squares, and let me show you how those turned out. On the backs of some of your flag pages, there's a smaller area on which you can put the print to add a little bit of a decorative element. So these squares are going to go on their very own little pile. I'm making all kinds of piles here. And then I'll get rid of the little tiny scraps. Last but not least is the paper that we plan to use for stamping and decorating. So I chose a light color, so if you choose to stamp, you have a good stamping surface. Let's trim this one sheet at 10 1/4, 7 3/4, 5 1/4, and 2 3/4. Take the piece that's currently in the base of your trimmer, rotate. We'll cut at 11 and 7 3/4. Now you just made another slimline panel, and look, this one even fits to nest on those. We won't be doing that, but it would. And then this guy is the same size as all of our other panels. Now, I've got 3 strips that we just created that are all the same size. Let's trim them all at 9, 6, and 3. Okay, so what that gave me is a whole bunch of rectangles that are all the same size, and if you'll notice, they are the perfect size to nest onto our flags. Now, if I had told you that you needed to make 18 2.5 by 3-inch panels, you might have just rolled your eyes and walked away. But instead, I'm showing you how to make 18 2.5 by 3-inch panels in the most efficient way possible. And that's what I'm all about. Okay, we also did create a couple of scraps, this little one, and then this long strip. So I'll set those aside. And since we're finished with all of our trimming for now, we'll set this aside as well and grab our score pal. Now earlier, when you determine the grain direction of the paper, it's going to dip easily in the direction that we plan to fold it. But also when you're using a score pal, it's important to remember that when you want to make an accordion style fold, that we alternate our score lines so that you have bumps and divots alternating so that you have the best fold possible. So I'm going to show you a little trick. I'll give you the numbers. We'll score at 3.5. And by the way, this is with the paper in there horizontally, so the 10 should be at the top. 3.5, score again at 4.5, 5.5, and 6.5. All right, now take the paper and flip it. So you bring the bottom of the paper up to the top. That's an important step. Now we're going to score in between each of these lines. So we'll score at 4, 5, and 6. Then I'll set aside this piece and grab the other burgundy color. Again, horizontally into the score pal, so the 10 is up here. We'll score at 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, 6.5. Important step, flip the paper bottom to top, and then score on the even numbers, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, done with the score pal. Now I'm ready to make my actual slimline card with a very, very special accordion spine. So again, the anatomy of a fold is that every fold has a bump and a divot. And do you see how the bumps and the divots are alternating? Well, the rule of thumb when you're folding a card is that the bump of the score gets buried on the inside of the fold. So that's a good way for you to remember, bury the bump. So I'm going to go ahead and make a fold right here on that first score line that is a bump. And if yours wasn't a bump, then flip the paper over to make it a bump, and I'm going to just crease it with my fingertip. Okay, now next, this fold, or this score, is a divot, so I need to bury that one the other direction. So now I have a valley fold and a mountain. This one needs to be buried on the inside of a fold. And then the next one is a divot, so I need to fold it in the other direction. So this is again called an accordion fold. Here I'm going to bury that. And I'm making pleats, bury the next one. And then here's the bump, so bury that inside the fold. So what I just made here is a series of 3 beautiful pleats, 1, 2, 3, to form what will become the accordion of my flag, Slimline flag card. Isn't that fun? Now here's another way that I do it, and again, all you need to do is just bury all these bumps and you'll have the perfect accordion. But here's my first bump, so I'm going to fold that in. Okay, then I'm just going to squeeze to get the next one buried and make my first pleat. So squeeze to bring the next one up and make another pleat. It really helps if you can use the edge of the table, but my camera isn't going that far, so I'm just kind of squeeze. And now I have these 3 gorgeous accordion folded pleats. Look at that. 1, 2, 3. The finish size right now, if the card is closed, is exactly 3.5 by 8.5, which will fit perfectly inside a number 9 envelope. Awesome. Okay, so now we basically have all the parts and pieces we need to complete our cards. I'm going to go ahead and assemble one so that you can kind of understand what the next steps are. But basically you can interchange the colors. So for example, on the front of this card, if I wanted to, I could add, say, this print, and on this one I'll add this print. Then on the inside, the right side of the card, I'm going to have you put the contrasting color of matte, and that should nest in there perfectly. And in the inside of the other one goes the other contrasting matte, and that will be on the inside back. Then we have this additional light colored piece, thinking that, you know, in some cases you may still have a paper that you used for A or B that's a little on the dark side. This matte will nest perfectly onto the darker ones to give you a good stamping and writing surface, or like a liner on the inside of your card as well. Then you have your decorative elements. So I think I'm going to take this nested piece that I showed you how it nests earlier. It goes this way actually. And I'm going to center that in the end on the front of this card. And then this one, I'm interchanging the colors. So I've got the blue card base. I'm going to do the burgundy matte. And that's going to be situated right there on the front of my card. Isn't that cool? Then basically it's a dealing game. So what I have next are all the flag pages. So if I just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 flags get dealt out to this card. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 flags to this card. Here's a spare if I want it. Now what you could use the spare for might be to stamp on and add something to the back panel. However you decide you want to use it, it's just always good to have spare. And then I'm also going to deal out these smaller pieces. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So I just split those up between the 2 cards. And now pretty much everything in that pile has been distributed. Next, these are the pieces that you can stamp on. So 1, 2, I'm just split them. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Look it, I've dealt out all of this stuff, and now I can get assembling and creating. Isn't that fun? So I'll set aside everything needed for one card, and we're going to put this one together. So the first thing I can do, and you don't have to adhere anything right out of the gates, you can just see the end result. I think the more important thing is the way the card is actually structured. So with my just standard 2-way adhesive, I'll nest these panels, and Add some adhesive to this. Later, if you want to go back, you could add ribbon or whatever, and center this onto the front panel of my card base. Lovely. Okay, now when we open this, we again have the option to install. We don't have to install them, but I'm going to right now, so just so you can see how this completely finishes. Center that. And then this fits beautifully on the inside with equal margin on all 4 edges. So nice. Okay, now let's talk about these flags. This is kind of important. So I'm going to go ahead and build myself 3 columns and 3 rows by dealing out these pieces. So 1, 2, 3, and I want to arrange them to kind of what I'm looking for. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Those are the 9 flags, and I'm not sure if you can see them all, but these are the 9 flags that I'm going to be installing into my book, and this is the way I want them to be installed. So you can just like study and make sure everything is looking the way you want it to look. Some of the things that you install will have a lot more contrast, as I had in my first 2 books. These prints looked relatively similar, but you can kind of tell that some are different. I'm going to set those aside for now and just study how this accordion is structured. So every pleat, 1, 2, 3, has a front side and a back side. And what I want to do is be very conscious of where I attach my flags. So for my first top row of flags, I'm going to start on the 3rd pleat. So 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to adhere the flag to the front of the pleat. To do that, I'm going to be using Club Scrap's bookbinding glue and a needle tip applicator. I like the idea of using a liquid adhesive to give me a little bit of adjustment time. And I'm going to take the flag that I had put into the upper right corner of my little grid, the upper right corner flag, and I'll apply adhesive to the back of the flag. And then I'm going to place it on top of the front of the 3rd pleat. And if you want to leave just a tiny margin at the top, that's fine. You don't want your flags peeking out beyond the edge of your card. Then I'm going to take the next piece in the top row, apply my adhesive to the back of it, and place it on top of this front of the 2nd pleat. Finally, a little adhesive on the back of the flag in the 1st column of the 1st row. And add this to the front of the 1st pleat. So pleat 1 has a flag, pleat 2, pleat 3. I hope that makes a lot of sense to you. I really, really do. Now we're going to repeat the same action, installing the bottom 3 pieces into our book. Or it's not a book, it's a card. It's an uber fancy card. So adhesive goes on the back, installs on the bottom edge, on the front of the 3rd pleat. And I just started the back because it's just a little easier to install these from the back to the front, because then you can align them. Now I'm installing on the front edge of the 2nd pleat. And then lastly, on the front edge of the 1st. I know that's repetitive, but if you're not paying attention, you can screw this up. Don't ask me how I know this. I just know this. Already, this card is starting to be kind of interesting, isn't it? Okay, remember how I said you have to do it on the front side of the pleat for the top row, front side of the pleat for the pleat for the 2nd row. Now I'm going to have you install them on the back side of the pleats from front to back. So if you want the print facing the front, you have to put your adhesive on the front. If you want your print facing the back, you can put your adhesive on the back. So it just kind of depends on what you're after. I'm going to go ahead and put my adhesive on the front face of this flag, and I'm going to place it on the back of the 3rd pleat. Give that just a second to secure itself. So let's look at the difference now on this back pleat. Those first 2 flags are on the front side, and this one's on the back side. And that's going to help produce a really cool effect in just a minute. Then again, remind yourself, put your adhesive on the front of the print and slide that behind the second pleat. And lastly, adhesive. Oops, I almost did it. I put my adhesive on the plain side. I'm going to put it on the printed side. And now I can install that right there on the back of the first pleat. Okay, so we kind of built the book from the back to the front. Now here's something cool that happens. I'm just going to close this and burnish a little bit. When you open the card and you pull outward, that's what happens. So if you had a print facing up that way, it would look kind of cool as well, but I just kind of liked them all. Isn't that fun? And when this card stands up, it can stand up like that. It's going to look awesome. Isn't that neat? So basically, your card is now a blank-ish canvas for your decorating enjoyment. So for decoration, these are the panels that we were left with after we distributed them left and right, to both of those cards. So if I stamped on this, maybe I could put a sentiment on this one, on the front. So I'm just going to go ahead and install this just to give you an idea of how these panels nest so beautifully onto the card. And then they're introducing a third color as well, adding some contrast. Now if I turn one pleat over to the back side, do you see how this panel is a little shorter because of the existence of the pleat? What I can do if I want is center one of those squares in that spot just to give it a little decorative element. Now there won't be a small square for every single piece, but that's okay. You could do one up here on this one and maybe down at the bottom on the next pleat, just add it there, and maybe another one on the back of the card. You could also stamp on these if you wanted to. The world is your oyster. Okay, then, oh, I still have one more. Okay, so I can maybe do this on the back so that I have a lot of interest on the back side where your major note and sentiment would be added. Okay, and then I still have 1, 2, 3, 4. So maybe I'll add a stamped panel to the back of this larger piece on the reverse side to add some color. How about one right here? And maybe we can still add one there. Okay, we still have one more blue. I think I'll add it to this one. Now every single piece allocated for this card has been installed. All that's left is to add our greetings and sentiments. For that, I'm going to be using stamps from this particular set. So every month at Club Scrap, we design a collection, and that has coordinating rubber stamps. So these are the stamps from the Beautiful Noise kit. I keep mine in a hubless DVD case. So I'll be going through and stamping these elements onto the panels and then adding them back to the cards. I normally wouldn't have installed them without stamping on them first because I want to be able to have lots of freedom for when I stamp, but what I really wanted was for you to see how the book comes together completely before it's even decorated. And again, you'll want to add your sentiments and greetings to these light blue shades or even all of them before you install them into the book. But here basically it's all completely assembled. And the other one, again, the second one has everything you need to make one just like it with the same number of components and the same results. And again, with that accordion spine, this interactive element is really fun, plus the advantage of the fact that this fits all into this envelope. Now, a fair warning, it may require a little bit of extra postage or perhaps hand delivery. If you have the opportunity to deliver this by hand, by all means, because I think you want to be around for when this is opened. So it's getting late. I'm going to go home and I'm going to come back to work tomorrow and gild the lily a little bit, and I'll show you my completed cards. I'll see you soon. Hey everybody, I'm back again at Club Scrap with my completed Slimline flag cards. I've made them both happy birthday cards because that would be the most common occasion we'd want to celebrate. And one of them I chose to decorate with the rubber stamps, as I'd mentioned. And the one that I already went ahead and assembled with you live on camera. I used something that we carry here at Club Scrap that accompany both of our page kits and card kits. These are printed cut-aparts, and other vendors manufacture these as well, and this is probably a great solution if you don't happen to enjoy rubber stamping. I was able to really make some cool decorative components for this card, so I'm Glad You're in My Life is just right from those card kit cut-aparts. And then I was able to add some border strips and retrofit some of the longer shaped quotes that are generally designed for pages to fit them right onto these smaller panels. So every side, pretty much of every flag in this book, has a decorative element that really makes this a fun card. Plus, I just saved a little bit of an area here in the back to write a personal note to the lucky recipient of this beauty. And then I also spent a little bit of time with my stamps, as I'd mentioned. Again, with the kits, we have stamps as well that coordinate. So this is a beautiful noise kit, and right down to the happy birthday, and every single element then that I used to decorate the inside of this came from that set of coordinating stamps. And of course, a mix of colors. So whatever strikes your fancy. If you're not a stamper, this cut-apart decor is a great option, or if you're a stamper, again, as I've mentioned before, the world is your oyster. So these two cards I made along with you with that beautiful noise kit. And don't forget that you can just substitute out with papers from your stash. In my stash, I had these papers from the vintage Americana collection, more of a patriotic theme, and I love how those turned out with my rubber stamps. And again, the Prism collection as well. I didn't use the stamps for these. I used my cut-aparts to really make some fun decorative elements for these as well. Well, there you have it, the Slimline flag card. I hope you had fun learning about this unique card structure and ways that you can use what you already have in your stash to make beautiful things. I also hope that maybe you learned something new today, like how to identify the grain direction of a piece of paper, or that the bump gets buried on the inside of a fold, or that there are really great efficient ways that we can approach our scrapbooking by cutting with these pre-developed formulas that help you save on time and your resources. If you're looking for the instructions that I referenced during today's workshop, you'll want to visit our landing page we've created just for you. It's clubscrap.com/slim. Just go to clubscrap.com/slim, and you'll be able to download the instruction document and then also get links to the resources that I used in today's workshop. Again, I'm Tricia Morris from Club Scrap, and I hope to see you soon.